Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, November 4th, and this is the meeting of the Citizens Finance Committee. All members are present and accounted for, so we will proceed. First on the agenda is I will open the meeting for public comment on any item not on the agenda. If anyone from the public would like to speak now. Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will move on to the consent calendar, item A1. That is the approval of the minutes for the regular Citizens Finance Advisory Committee meeting held on August 17th, 2015. And the only thing I see on that, Susan, was an adjustment on the date. It says August 21st. If we could have that reflect August 17th, that was Monday. Okay? Okay, so I'll entertain any discussion on the minutes for August 17th. Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
I'll move.
Thank you, Susan. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Marlis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, approved. Item A2 is the approval of the minutes for the Special Citizens Finance Advisory Committee held on September 24th. And I've reviewed those. I don't, other than maybe one small error in the wording here, let's see. On the bottom of page 2, first sentence, Mr. Livick spoke to the street selection process. If is a mathematical model should read it is a mathematical model. So I think maybe we just for clarity we want to adjust that. Again, Susan, that's in the minutes.
That's the August.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the minutes on A1.
Yeah.
Okay, so just adjust that. Thank you, Marlis. My apologies. Bottom, okay. So A1 is still approved as amended. On A2, I think the date was wrong at the on the staff report. So just adjust that to September 24th. Any discussion on those minutes from September 24th? Okay, motion to approve?
Yeah, I'll move it.
Susan?
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed, none. So we will approve those minutes and file. All right, that brings us to item B1, first quarter budget performance review. Open it to public comment. Any member of the public would like to comment on item B1? Seeing none, close public comment. And let's move on to item B1, discussion of the first quarter budget performance review. Susan, I believe you've had an opportunity to answer the majority of our questions that were sent to you. Is there any additional information we need to consider before we discuss?
No, I think included in the packet were the answers to the questions that I received, and I don't think there's any other information that I need to provide.
Okay, thank you. So let's open this up for discussion. Who would like to begin?
Well, I'll start.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
I had sent Susan, and Susan sent me back a response on particular.
Mic on, push.
Oh.
Is that better? Okay, oh, there. Okay, I can hear it. Sorry. I had sent on a question to Susan, which she had given me a response to on one particular item. I don't know if it's if we're going to dive in right now on focusing on particular items or any more broader discussion we might want to have first.
Well, maybe let's just start with the broader discussion. If I think what your item is I think several of us have asked for some high-level summary reports so that we could maybe make some better recommendations and not have to wade through the accumulated transaction unless we're looking for the backup detail. And I know, Susan, you sent me the budget summary report, but I believe it was only for the general fund. It was only for particular.
So I sent everyone the budget performance report, and those are the ones that are broken by department, and they're single line items for each of those departments with totals. Then I also sent out the accumulated transactions, which tells you everything that goes into those totals. The other thing that I sent was a report that you had asked me for, Chairwoman Spagnola, and that I sent out and said this is only for the general fund because I wanted to see if it was something you were all interested in. It takes all the departments in the general fund and it crams them up into one line item categories. So for, say, contract services, every department's contract service is in that one line item. This is not where the council really wanted you to be. They wanted you to be looking at the individual detail and deciding, hey, you know, why is public services contracted with Canon for all their copiers and the harbor's contracted with Rico and the fire department, and they're not, by the way, I'm just using it as an example because we're all with Rico. Fire's got Sharp, police has Xerox. That doesn't make sense. Everybody should be getting, you know, the best thing you could do is get under one umbrella. So that was where they really wanted you to find that kind of stuff. But the higher level one, I wasn't sure, and I've never used that report before, and I think I might have said that right off the bat, that I had not printed that report, and apparently there was some disparity with some of the departments that didn't show. So that report is one that I can provide to you anytime. I just need to go back and have our accounting people make sure that all the departments are set up to roll into that particular report. They don't always happen that way. You have to actually go into the setup and say, oh, by the way, pick up this guy too. It's a little, and we do have some new departments, that way they didn't work. So I can provide you the budget to actual, the budget performance report is probably the best high-level summary that would still give you the departmental feel.
Okay. I know that I really struggled with just the volume of it. And so the kind of detail that you pointed out where you're looking at this and that, you know, trying to tie things together for different departments, the individual transactions of, you know, $10 and $20 and $30 was almost like, it was like a fire hose, you know, it was a little bit too much. But to me, I mean, I've done a lot of budgeting work for large organizations, and you almost sort of, you have a layering of what you look at. There are individual items that, if any large, and the reason I picked out the one that I picked out when I sent you the note was it was a particularly large item, and so I had a question about it. So you look for patterns, you look for anomalies. If somebody's 50% expended at the end of the first quarter, well, that's something. Then you go start looking at that. So those things that look like they're out of whack in some way, or things that are particularly large that you should look at because you should. Otherwise, people looking at the budget for paper clips is not really necessarily a good use of everyone's time. So that's what I was trying to do when I looked through this, was to try and pick out, and the presentations were actually very helpful in doing that, trying to pick out particular areas where there were just large items that weren't explained, or and there were a couple of things where I had a question on a $5,000 item, but the one I sent you on was like $250,000. Well, that was a big item, and so that was why I questioned it. So there's that was sort of the approach that I looked at. So I think what would be helpful would be to start out with some level of high-level detail, and you don't want to sanitize it too much or you're not going to pick up anything. And then it's very helpful to have all the transaction data to start digging down from there, but otherwise you just don't know where you're going when you're looking through 600 pages of transactions. So that's what I was really, I don't know if other people were struggling with the same thing, but that's what I was sort of struggling with in this first go-around,
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Susan. It was just much too overwhelming. My understanding was that the council wanted us primarily to try to evaluate the performance report and make a recommendation on whether it made sense and whether you seemed to be on target, and to make recommendations for how you might communicate better with the public with respect to the budget and the performance reports. So my first suggestion would be that we do try to come up with a report that people can easily understand and is clear. And I know one of my concerns about it is because it's a cash-based transaction budget, it's very difficult to evaluate whether or not you're on target because it's not an accrual basis. So you have to almost add notes to explain that all the revenue isn't in because it isn't a portion for the expenses for the month. And I know Greg had that same concern that some of those, in a contract, for instance, if you paid the bill, it might be a contract for the full year, but instead of being expensed for the month, it was expensed in that month for the full year. And so that kind of skews how you can interpret the reports that we get, because I know that right now revenues are under the 25% you would expect at the first quarter, and expenses are over, but we really can't know for sure why that is the case. Is it because we're going to get a lot more revenues, which I assume is the case because the property tax is going to come in, and that's going to even it out? Or are we really overspending, and we should be looking at that seriously? So that's my initial take on it. I don't know if anybody else had that feeling also, but
I'd like to hear from Betty and Greg. Go ahead, Betty.
Thank you. My approach was a little bit different when I looked at the items and just checking to see what was appropriate to spend. And then the question would have been if it was accrued in that month or for a year or something like that. But what I was really looking at when I was going through that is to see how appropriate the expenses were and how much it meant to meet the goals that we have, and I felt that we should have in the city. So I felt on that sense it was good to have that money. Now I know because the actual penny, the dollar and penny is not there, but conceptually I think we're having a very smart budget, and it really works to go through that. Now if we want to get really into the nitty gritty, I did go to that one first meeting where they had all the departments report, and it was very enlightening to me to see how they were trying to recoup their costs and keep on the budget without compromising their mission in that department. So I was very impressed with that. And I think when we go through this process and we get more information, we can then see how the community will respond to some of our questions to make the clarifications better so that they understand it's not like your home budget. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a couple of things. First is, let me address Susan's comment about where she articulated council wanted us to be. I think that's a fine goal for us to add and to address. But I would say we probably need different reports to achieve that particular item. For example, we could have, maybe there's some kind of ad hoc reporting capability where we could get a list of all vendors and then the account code that deals with supplies or services. And then we could look at those kinds of things to ask if we've got too many vendors doing providing one kind of service or supply, or where we could look at volumes and scale for that. So I think we would need different kinds of reports to achieve different ends. And I don't think these reports really achieved that. And I agree with the rest of the committee here who's, kind of stated about the summary level. And one of the biggest issues I had in terms of bringing anything to the table to contribute to identifying budget issues, etc., that any manager in the city would be far more qualified than I am right now to say, hey, that's a problem there. That's why I was kind of getting at the point of, for our reporting purposes, what I threw out for our committee to look at is maybe each quarter we understand for each fund and department, because that seems to be or some high-level organization in the department. For that fund organization, if we understood what the projected amount of the fiscal year budget would be for that first quarter, for that fund and that organization, then we could look at the expenditures for that quarter and say, okay, those expenditures are relatively close to what they had expected or projected to need of the fiscal year budget for that first quarter. And then, similarly, as we went through from quarter to quarter, we could look at year to date, that individual quarter, and then we could also look at where we're at for the whole fiscal year. And I think that would kind of give us the information that we're looking for in terms of how close are we on track. Because there is a very cyclical nature of expenditures and revenues. And my biggest issue was I don't know the cyclical nature of those things. And I think it would be very important to put that into a sort of projected, estimated budget piece for each quarter, year to date, and then obviously on the fiscal year you have your total amended budget. And then the final thing I would mention is the city doesn't use encumbrance accounting. They don't encumber contracts and other, which could be high dollar items, and that's okay. But I'm sure every manager that reports to or that gives a presentation to you and Dave during the department reviews, they know what those legal obligations they have are, and unless we understand what that is and how they've been expended from quarter to quarter, and then we see some kind of outstanding balance for those, we don't really know the true position of the budget. So, for example, if we got to quarter three, let's say that we had a $25,000 contract for some kind of service or supply, and it looks like we spent 75% of our budget for whatever budget we're looking at, whatever specific summary level we're looking at. Well, we might say, geez, the 75% at quarter three, if there's an even burn rate through the year, maybe we're right on track. But geez, what we might not know is that we've got a $25,000 encumbrance or legal obligation sitting out there that is yet to be expensed, along with other items that may not be under a contract, that we just incur that expense through a purchase order. So those are the kinds of things that I think would be helpful for me.
And if I can attempt to summarize a little bit of what I heard, thank you, Greg. I wanted to also respond to what Susan said the City Council is looking for us to do. That's an excellent example. However, I think for our first budget review to go through the 600-700 pages trying to find those things is not the proper mode of attack. We need to start a little higher level. And as Greg said, most companies will spend 80% of their money with 20% of their suppliers. What we want to do is find out who those suppliers are, look at those contracts, make sure we don't have 2,000 different termination end dates or inconsistent terms and things like that. And I believe that will come. But right now, the focus was on the first quarter budget report. So, and further to that, we have written to Mr. Heading asking for some assistance prioritizing and clarifying our objectives. So he's away, out of town, out of the country apparently right now, but we will meet with him, I'm sure, when he gets back. He's indicated to me he will schedule that with myself and all of us. So I think we'll get a little more clarification of what exactly the council wants us to do and focus our time on. So that's number one. Secondly, I'm thinking Greg has been kind enough to even put a little template, rough order, yesterday late. I haven't had too much time. I glanced at it, looked great. But I think as for what the council wants, that's something that we could say, hey, this is the format we want to see this, and maybe start it out on the trial basis for your quarterly reviews, because if we can understand it, then I think at a high level citizens can understand it. And that should be what we're looking to do. As a Citizens Advisory Committee, I think we want to advise the kind of information people would like to see that would help them know what the revenue is, where the money's being spent. Is it prioritized? Does it match, as Betty pointed out, the goals? So I think we all have the same ideas, goals, suggestions, but we're going to have to put to paper what that format should look like. And I also attended, as Betty mentioned, the half of the first budget review operational that the directors, the department staff gave to Mr. Buckingham. And it was excellent. It was in PowerPoint. And my suggestion with that was when I went home and tried to print it off, everyone, it was either PowerPoint or PPTX or different formats. Some didn't have dates, some printed out a couple to a page. So the first suggestion would be, let's get that in a consistent format. And then that would be our recommendation, because if you do that internally, then you pass that information on to us, put it on the website, and citizens can understand it. They don't need 6 different software programs to read it. So those are my suggestions.
I just want to add one thing to that, Barbara. Some of us were not at that meeting because only 2 members could go to the internal meeting that you had. And when I first saw the PowerPoint presentations, I didn't understand them because I didn't understand that they were just the exceptions to the budget. They weren't a full summary of what each department had done during the first quarter. It was really the exceptions. And it was very helpful to know that, because then I could understand them better and they made more sense. And it gave a very good picture of where each department thought they were they were either on target or there were some unexpected things, and it was very helpful. So, but with the explanation that was the way it was. And yes, a consistent format would have been very helpful also.
Good clarification, and I think that's exactly where we are. We take something like what Greg was suggesting, which would have everything at the high level, and then only note the exceptions. And your presentation could be a 2-page because you're on task or on target.
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful to have notes that would explain any kinds of differences, any unexpected things that you wouldn't expect to see in that high-level report. That would be very helpful to understand. Revenue hasn't come in yet, but it's coming in November or whatever.
So maybe our action out of this will be to get together and look at what Greg has come up with, and maybe we would just give you a little sample of something that we think would work well for your presentations, and maybe not. If it's not enough detail, then you get into the question, are you doing double duty? But if you're pulling the information out of the same database and the same high-level stuff, you're just ratcheting it up a higher level for not only this committee, but for the citizens, so that we can publish it on our website. And if people are in agreement with that, we'll take a look at that and see what we can come up with.
I do agree that we need to have a template. I'll use an outline. Most of us have been trained with an outline. I think a template would help us, and then once we get to use it, we'll have more information on how we want to see these exceptions displayed, because we're not going to have the exceptions all the time, and it may be just a yearly thing that we have to look at the cycle of taxes or the cycle of a deposit or something like that. But already I can see that we're going in that direction, and I think that I've already, with what we've been discussing here, so it's just a matter of putting that together, tweaking it, and working on that. Once you get that, I think the rest is not going to be easy, but it's going to make it better to understand.
You have a roadmap.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it helps to have a roadmap, and I think that focusing on the exceptions, and also I think in addition to the exceptions, focusing on the large items. I think eventually, as we get more familiar, I know this is my first time on this group, and I plan on digging down in the details, at some point. But in order to have a starting point, I think it's good to have a summary thing like that, and then you can look at. But I think we should, in addition to exceptions, you should be looking at focusing on large items, because there may be improvements or changes to things, even if they're on track for, say, budget. So it's not a budget exception, but there may be some other things you want to look at for large items. That's where you're going to get a lot of your bang for the buck. And so I think that in addition to the standard format, any kind of, and calling out exceptions, I think focusing on, I don't know what the threshold would be for this kind of a budget, but figuring out what the threshold is for something that's really significant and making sure we're also tracking those things.
And that's a good point, because I think it was Susan's question regarding the contract services for the police department, and that was for the sheriff dispatch. Public could have that same question. That solves that, rather than people, what are they doing? Outsourcing, part-time, extra, police help for private events. That's where the communication, simple contract, and it's been a
What is ongoing and what is just one-time cost.
Well, and it was helpful, I mean, for that particular item, for example, so now I know what it is, but the question is, well, why is it, it looks like none of it's been spent. Is it going to be spent in the next quarter? So just, knowing what's going on with the very large items, I think is a very helpful thing to track.
We're just going to say that's an example of a contract where the expense should be on a monthly basis because the contract is paid once, and I assume we have not received the bill for that, but we receive the services on a continual basis. So there's an expense every month for that service that we are contracting with the sheriff for.
So we're on a cash basis accounting, correct, Susan?
Yes.
Okay, and what do other cities do? Don't some of them use accrual basis?
They do accrual basis, but they'll do it, some of them do it on a monthly basis, others, like Morro Bay, do it on an annual basis. So we march along with our expenditures as they come in, we pay them when the bills are presented, and we move forward. We don't take a contract and spread it out throughout the months to see how much we should have of that contract every month. We install an annual budget. We don't spread the budget. It's not that we don't have the ability to spread the budget. We can, but it's never been done that way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, in my experience, basically, whenever you've had a contract, you encumber those funds because that's a legal obligation for the fiscal year. So what you're doing then is you're using modified accrual, and you're essentially posting the expenditure. Say that this particular encumbrance, you're going to have 3 or 4 different invoices over the course of the fiscal year. Well, once you get the invoice, you post the expenditure and you partially reverse the encumbrance. So from a budgetary standpoint, you still see the impact to the budget, whether it's partially encumbered and partially expended or fully expended, you still see the budgetary impact, and you're recognizing the expense on a modified accrual basis. So from an accounting standpoint, you're keeping track of it properly. And then from a budget standpoint, you're still seeing the full impact of the contract, whether it's no expended or fully expended for the fiscal year. But again, as Susan has pointed out, they don't encumber contracts here and or purchase orders or things like that. But even if we don't do that in a systematic way, I will bet my bottom dollar managers in the city know exactly where they stand with those things and what their balances are and when they're going to post those expenditures. So even if we maintain that current business operation, the way they do that business process today, it still doesn't prevent us from saying, geez, okay, for that contract, how much have we actually posted as an expenditure, and what is the balance for that, and show that in our reporting. So.
Go ahead.
No, I was wondering, do you want a recommendation from us? I think we do have to make a recommendation to council.
We do, yeah, right, okay. So if you want to attempt to say what I've said on the recommendation for the template.
Well, let me see if I didn't write it down. I don't know if anybody did. Did you, Barbara? Because then you would have it.
Well, let me try then.
Okay, go ahead.
I would move that our committee come up with a template and sample format for the budgeting to include revenue and expenditures in a simplified format that we think would be useful for the citizens, and present that as a recommendation to staff and city council.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Or what I would propose is I'll send out what you sent, Greg, to everybody, and then we'll take a look at that, maybe come up with some. It was just really a few lines from an Excel spreadsheet, I figure, cut and paste.
That brings up the issue of the Brown Act and whether or not we can actually be communicating with ourselves and not in public.
On work products?
Yes, on work products, and especially since this is an issue that we are discussing in public, I think we probably cannot do it across all of us. Would that be correct?
You're correct. And what I was going to suggest to you is that then we would have to schedule a workshop so that you could develop the form and the product that you want to present to the city, and then we can move forward with that.
Would it be acceptable if each of us sends to you our thoughts, or at least an outline of what we'd like to see, and you can come up with something? Would that be a better approach? And I mean, right now we're making a recommendation to the council to do this, but I don't believe this is something that has to be done before our next meeting. We could address this issue again. This is just the first quarter financial reports, so we will have another quarter. And
Or alternatively, maybe two of us would get together, come
That
up
would
with
work.
something, then we just put it on our next agenda for discussion and take it from there.
that's another alternative.
That's what I was going to suggest, is that you do a subcommittee to get together, to come up with a standard template that you want to suggest. You bring it into our next meeting, which our next meeting will be in December. We'll have the Measure Q meeting, and it would not be, I could actually add an item on there for, other items and anything else that the committee wants to bring forward. That could be something that's presented at that time. We can then take it to the city manager and go from there.
Susan, quick question for you. I'm clear about the Brown Act in terms of elected officials, but I'm surprised. Could you help, with my understanding of that? Does literally the Brown Act cover a citizens committee like this? It truly
Yes.
where
Yes.
we have no policy or decision making, it still covers us.
Yes,
Okay.
it does.
Very good. I'll be darned.
I think I did some research, and since we were chartered by City Council with regular meetings, we didn't qualify for an exemption, because I was looking for an exemption to improve our productivity here.
Try, Barbara.
Susan, I wanted to ask your advice. If we're putting together some kind of outline, and we also, in addition to exceptions, want to be looking at large items, can you suggest maybe a dollar threshold or some other way to kind of screen out what you would think would be significant items?
Well,
I mean, like the one I picked out seemed like it was a large item compared to the other ones that were
It was.
being discussed. Okay, but is there, is that like $250,000? Is it $100,000? Is it just something to start with? I think, and we may refine that as we go.
Our auditors use a threshold of $25,000. Anything under $25,000, they don't worry too much about, but they look for single items, issues that are over.
Same concept, actually. Yeah.
The other thing that I can do for you that would be very helpful is run you the list of contractors. And that way you've got the contractor list, you can look at the contractors that we're using, and then that's a shorter list that I usually bring into Excel, sort it, and it prints contractor, dollar, total, and then you've got it, and you can see what we're spending with a contractor, and then make the decision at that point where this looks like this, and this looks like this, and why are you guys doing all this? And so they'll give you a little bit better feel. Most of the contractors, and I usually pick the contract items, but there are also maintenance items that can be thrown in there. I mean, I can do those kind of reports and get them into a little bit more condensed format.
Is there a way that we could take a look at the last audit report? That might be also be some place to start.
The last audit report, which would be 13-14 at this point, is on the web. 14-15 won't be out until the end of December.
And on the contract list, can you also include what the contract is for? Because I know we use a lot of contracted services in the city, and the Sheriff's Department is a good example, or not. Is that?
It doesn't, it won't come out in that way because we don't have purchase orders in place yet. Once the purchase orders are in place, then we would be able to go back and pull up the information out of the purchasing module, and it would tell us that this purchase order for this contract was issued to this guy, and we'd have a little bit better feel for what it was. But off the financial software right now, because we don't have purchase orders, it's just going to say Katie, Janney, but they're going to be in the division for cloisters, so we'll know that, oh, yeah, and it's maintenance for whatever, so you'll be able to back into it that way, but some of them would be very difficult. The project numbers help, and you can see the description of the project. There's clues in there, but they're not easily accessible in one spot.
Isn't some of the city staff doing that now, I would think?
In what regard?
Well, in looking at the contractors or suppliers and the volume amount and the number of contracts and when they expire and...
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm just a little curious. I mean, certainly we can do that, but I guess to stay focused on what we're talking about on the template, that would all be very helpful, whatever you can give us, but to stay focused, and Susan's suggestion on the audit would be good, but if we have a couple of us that could come up with the template, and even having done that, they can't email their suggestions out to everybody. It has to come back to a meeting, or we could have a special meeting.
Correct. What you can do is you can email me back your ideas. I can put them all together in one lump.
Okay.
And I can distribute it. But we have to be very careful about what kind of work product we're passing around, because at some point you're going to be making decisions about it, and that's where we get in trouble.
Okay, all right. So if two of us come up with a work product and the rest of us maybe have some thoughts, we fire it all off to Susan. She'll collaborate, compile it all together and send it back to us, but we can't do anything with that until we have a meeting, basically. Right. Okay.
So then I just have one request, if possible, when we get the report with the various vendors, would the individual, expenditure account code, that's not as detailed as we'd like with a commodity code or something like that purchasing would support. But would that help us at all, do you think? Because at least it's in the same general bucket. If we saw vendors in the same expenditure account code, we could then kind of drill in on what specific service or product that's hitting that budget line, and that might be somewhat helpful for us.
It'll be somewhat helpful because we'll have maintenance contracts, and so you'll know that this guy is doing maintenance, but you may not know what he's doing maintenance on.
Right.
And if we can get the explanation from the last time I did this, I took it all out of the accumulated transaction report, ran those groups of object codes, and came up with this, and I was able to extrapolate certain data from it.
Right, so that's great. If you could get the object code and maybe some of the, I'm sure AP's adding some kind of description in there too that could be valuable in terms of connecting the vendors that are doing the same things. And what is the timing for the purchasing module? That's great that you guys are working on that.
We've purchased it.
All right.
We actually we have the module. We've had the training. What we've got to set up in place first is the training for everyone else to know what they're going to do, and the policy related to and procedures of how you request a purchase order, how you do what you do.
Yeah.
Our biggest problem is we're so small that policy writing falls to me, and it just gets put on the list. And it's unfortunate.
It is. It's tough. There's a big burden on you. And there's a lot of good information that can be captured, but there's a cost to that. And so when you're a small organization like the City of Morro Bay, the cost-benefit collision occurs very soon. And so there's a lot of things you'd like to do, but you just don't have this economies of scale to get it. But I think it's great that you guys are working on that. That's very great, good to be moving forward.
Yeah, we've made steps forward, and we just have to get to where we can get all of our ducks in a row so that we know how we're going to train people, how they're going to request, how we're going to start it. And then once we launch it out on the departments, then we'll usually get some feedback and say, oh, yeah, you might want to think about this, you might want to think about that. And that's pretty typically how we've done it. In many cases, what we've done is just dumped it on them and had them come back and say, well, we'd like to see this and tweaked. And we're trying to get away from that because it's frustrating to everyone who goes in and they want to do their electronic timesheet and it's been changed and it looks totally different from the last pay period that you put in. And you weren't told and you didn't know, and so then we have a little chaos for a while and everybody gets used to it. We want to get away from the chaos.
That's why I think working on the template is going to be really essential because it's going to really dovetail into what they're doing from a different point of view. And I think that's going to be helpful because I think what we have seen in the past is that they're doing something and we're doing something else and there's never any connection. But I think this is really going to help the connection and then on to the community.
Thank you, Betty. I agree. Do you think with this system you're using, it's possible, theoretically, you can hear what we're discussing and asking for?
I think we'll be able to I think so. I think we can get a lot of it out there. There won't have to be a lot of manual input, which is what I'm hoping to stay away from on everybody's behalf, actually. I want to make sure that as much as possible can be run on the system. When we have the purchase orders implemented, we would actually be able to run a purchase order report so that you would see that we have $1.2 million contract for streets in Measure Q, and it's with this particular guy. And then as you see them going along, each time I run a quarterly report, that purchase order should be reducing along, and you'll have a better feel for what's going on.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And are you guys, when you're implementing the new purchasing module, are you going to actually capture commodity level or is just the account level information?
Right now, we have an extremely detailed set of our chart of accounts. It's incredible. We have as many codes as we could possibly imagine happening, and I'm one that likes to collect certain things and put them in buckets like utilities. I don't really need to know what electric, gas, and each one is. But we have the ability to use all of our commodity codes. And if we've got one that's going to be for 2 or 3 different kinds of things, we should. And I say should because I haven't explored the purchasing module as much as I'd like to. We should be able to pull those in. If not, then we'll just have a broad chunk of money that we're saying we're, dealing with this vendor on.
Yeah. Thank you.
So who would like to be on the committee to come up with a template? The committee of 2, unfortunately. We can only have 2.
Well, I vote for Greg since he started it.
Thank you. I was hoping Greg would agree to that. Okay. And who would like to work with him?
I'm willing to do that.
Betty, you were also hitting it?
Well, that's right. She can do it.
Okay. You'll get your chance in
I'll
December.
get my chance.
Okay, so I will amend the motion that we come up with a template for high-level budget and revenue expenditure reporting by quarterly in a summary format to be developed, such template to be developed by Craig and Betty, and then brought back to our, we can only have 2. I'm sorry, Marlis and, thank you, Greg and Marlis, and to be brought back to our next meeting. And I also, if you come up with something sooner or think maybe a short meeting, we can always do an interim workshop. We'd only need 3 of us here to,
Yes,
Correct?
we can do that.
might logistically, if we just find a date, pick a date, or so, if you come up with something you don't want to wait till December, that's fine.
Yeah, and I guess as far as being too much of a drain on Susan's time, do you have to be present when we have our workshop or if we met together?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think we've always had a facilitator we have a facilitator with the regular meetings, but if it's just a workshop, I wasn't really working with either Barbara or Betty when they were at our
Budget review.
presentation of the budget to the city manager. So I would think that we would open up our conference room for you, set it up, and you would be able to reserve that and come in and work.
Okay, so I'm sorry, if that's the case, would we want maybe the entire committee to just come in and do a work and then
Exactly. My question to Susan was-
it might be, more efficient to just get everybody in there, pound it out, and then we're ready to go.
Then it would be a public meeting that we would have to notify, and it would have to be, also be taped, or at least taped?
Noticed and recorded,
Yeah,
at least.
yeah.
And I did record the one workshop that we had, so we could do that again.
So I guess I'm confused. If we have a workshop, it has to be, even though it has to be noticed and
If it's all of you, yes.
all of us. What if it's 3 of us?
3 of us, yes, because
'Cause it's a majority.
It's a
Okay.
majority.
Okay.
Only if it's just the 2 that are going to be working on the template, they could get together and work
Mm-hmm.
in the conference room, and I wouldn't have to do any recording. I wouldn't even be involved.
But it would be a good idea, it seems to me, for us to meet with you and for you to be involved, because we don't want to come up with something that's going to be too onerous for the staff to produce. So I think you need to be involved if we're going to come up with something that's workable.
And
And you know what the capabilities of the system are, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are we saying that we're going to have 2 people get something together and then have the group meet?
Yes, but I think we're suggesting that we're going to meet with Susan when we do that, Greg and I.
Oh, Greg and you and, okay.
And Susan, and then we will look at that at our next meeting.
And then whatever we do come up with as a template, the city manager is going to have to look at and decide if this is something that he feels that works as well. So we'll probably involve him at that point, too.
Okay.
And that way, if we're going the wrong way, he can get us steered back the way he wants us to go.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like the committee of 2 will meet and come up with something, coordinate with Susan, and actually, probably by the time all that occurs, we'll be at our next meeting, so.
I think so.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I made that move, and did anybody second that motion?
I
Marlis did,
second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, opposed, none, so moved. All right, so what other discussion do we want to have on the first quarter budget report? Are we prepared to make a recommendation? Do we still have more questions?
The only question I had, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate time to ask it or not, I did find what I thought was an inconsistency in the investment policy. And I don't know if that would be a separate subject that we would have to notice as a discussion of some kind. Is that...
No, it's part of the first quarter financial reports. It was
Okay.
something that I included because it's something that the council had wanted you to look at. And so as part of those reports, the portfolio was in there as well. Those are all items that can be discussed now under this B1 topic.
Okay. It seemed to me that there was a bit of a contradiction. We're in the first part of and I think everybody saw the note that went around about this, but the first part of the policy, it implies that there is that is not to be trading of investments in response to market forces. And in the second part, it does give the city the option to either adopt a passive or an active investment strategy. And an active investment strategy, almost by definition, is buying and selling of investments in response to market conditions. So It did, and I understand that we're using a passive strategy now, and so there is not an actual contradiction at this moment, but the policy itself seems to me to include that contradiction. So I guess the question is it seems like a contradiction, but it isn't a contradiction, or is it a contradiction? If it does, do we want to recommend a change to that?
And that particular situation, you've got the initial says that we will not be actively trading our products. Later on in the policy, I described the active trading and thank you, and the passive method. And then the next paragraph down, I say the city uses the passive methodology. It's more of a definition than anything. Maybe it should be reworded more and say, here are the following definitions of the types of investing that can happen. And then you've got active and passive, and the city chooses passive, or?
Well, the question I have is an active strategy in contradiction to the first part, which is a sort of a statement of policy, I guess, for lack of a better term, that says we aren't going to do that kind of trading, and then it still has the option then to do that kind of trading. So my question was, is that a contradiction? And if it is, should we address that?
I think Susan's point is well taken, because it is a contradiction the way I read it. It's not applicable because you are not employing an active strategy, but it's still in the wording, and if you were to change from your passive to active strategy, then that contradiction.
Then it seems like, then one part says you're not going to buy and sell in response to market forces, and the other one says you will. And then it seemed to me that was a contradiction, unless I'm misunderstanding the definitions or something. There's some nuance maybe that I wasn't picking up in reading the policy.
Well, what I was wondering, it doesn't say what triggers would make it active or passive. And that's what I was wondering, because it has to be, why would you choose this? What would be the benefit, and why you would go the other way?
Well, it says under the active, it says to achieve an investment objective.
Yeah, but is it an investment objective for what?
Well, it could be risk, could be return, could be...
But what I'm saying is, the money has to go someplace. And so are they doing it because they found out they needed the need for something, and that's why you trigger it to look for more money in that category?
Well,
or are we just saying that it's just a normal cycle and you're just looking for...
It seems like most reasons you would trade under an active strategy would be in response to changes in market forces. You have some certain thing you were doing, and now you're saying, I'm going to sell this, or I'm going to buy this to do something, because you have some objective.
But you have that gain.
You're doing it to achieve whatever objective it is, lowering risk or raising return, or doing, because you don't want to, you're trying to spread out your trades in some way. I mean, I'm just picking things out of the air.
I think you're right. But what I'm saying is, would that be better to have something more clarified so that not everybody understands the market, and that the reason it's triggering it is because you're looking to reduce risk?
Well, then you should change the beginning part that says you're not going to buy and sell according to market,
or whatever.
Market fluctuations.
But what I'm just saying is that for a person that you bring that subject up, they're going to right away say, okay, is it going to reduce the risk? Are we going to be able to have something, maintain things better?
Susan, who wrote this policy?
This policy is a boilerplate that I got partly from the state of California and partly from the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers.
Have the auditors looked at this, or the management partners, or any?
The auditors have looked at this. Management partners did not.
And the auditors were okay? I noticed that the first date had said January 2015. Now it says July. So an earlier copy I picked up somewhere. So has it been changed in the first 6 months of 2015, or did you just update it and change the date?
When we adopted the budget in 2014, we made the decision that we would bring the investment policy back each year with the budget. Prior to that, the investment policy had been adopted every January. When I changed it, I put 2015 because we were going to bring it back in January, and I remembered we weren't doing that until we brought it back
I
with
just
the
wanted to know if
budget.
there's any other
And that's
changes.
why I changed it. No, nothing changed.
Okay.
Now, the particular section that we're talking about, it just talks about portfolio management activity, and it says active or passive management. And it's a descriptive. So it's saying,
Yeah.
this is what this one is, this is what that one is. It can be removed.
Well, I'm not sure that it should be removed, but I think it should be consistent. So if we decide that it's okay to have an active strategy, if that's the election, then the beginning part shouldn't say that we're not going to do that. So I'm just saying, my question wasn't a value judgment as to which was better or preferable or anything, just that there should be consistency between the two sections.
I
And it would.
Excuse me. I assume that the city council adopted this financial policy. Yeah,
Yes.
this financial investment.
Yes.
Yeah. So it would have to go, if we were going to change it, it would have to go back to the city. We'd have to make that recommendation
Yes.
to the city council.
So if I could just throw my 2 cents in here. You know, when I hear active management, typically I associate that with risk-adjusted returns of equities, stocks. And the city is not invested in any stocks, any equities. It's all fixed income. So about the only thing active management would mean that I can see is that you might say, geez, I don't like the return I'm getting on this one fixed income instrument, and I can get a much better return for this instrument with the same period. And, you know, you might break a CD and get a new CD. Or one of the comments I had is I see there's a tremendous amount of money invested in the, what is it,
LAIF.
Yeah.
That's the local agency investment fund.
Yeah, that's administered by the state. And the yield on that is really, really low. I mean, just moving the money into a CD, you could quadruple your return on that. So I guess, so just to summarize my points, one is I don't know if we need to make a huge issue about active versus passive here, because you're not engaged in stock picking. You know, that's prohibited by law, period. And it's just a matter of how can you best achieve a return with fixed income investments. And then the second thing is, I really think, you know, that it might look at how much money's in the local agency investment fund and try to find a higher yield for that money.
Well, and I think we don't want to tie people's hands, you know, to the detriment of the city. And I'm not suggesting that we should not have the ability to do that kind of thing. If the return here is better, if, you know, risk-adjusted kind of return looks better here than there, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then we shouldn't say that you're not allowed to do something that looks at market fluctuations and buys and sells on that basis. So that's all I'm saying is let's be consistent, not that we should go this way or that way.
So are you going to be thinking about making a recommendation to update that?
That's what I was thinking, is maybe we might want to do something like that.
Even that one sentence, the city, as stated above in the objectives under safety, follows the passive. You could rephrase that to the city is currently following a passive investment strategy of holding investments.
Right, and
comma,
then-
but
yeah.
that their option may.
Right, but then at the beginning, it shouldn't say that you won't do that.
That's
You should
right,
say
yeah,
something
right.
that, you know, that you have the flexibility within X, Y, Z bounds. I don't know how to, I mean, again, I didn't have a recommendation for how to change it. I just wanted to know if it seems to me there was an inconsistency and to point that out. So I think if we acknowledge that there is potentially an inconsistency, whether it's a definitional one or some other inconsistency, then this group could take on possibly a
I think it's a
rewrite
separate
or
action,
an editing
yeah.
of the policy.
So do we want to go through everything, just what this one was brought to your attention? Were there others that were brought to your attention that we may have to look at all of that?
Well, this was I just included in the package, and I looked through it because I was interested, you know,
Yeah,
to know
of
what our
course,
strategy
of
was. But I didn't notice that kind of inconsistency in any of the other
Okay.
documents, so that's why this one stood out.
And I think my point in writing the letter to Mr. Heading was that this was one of many things. And unfortunately, I don't think it's a two-sentence change. It's maybe to start, but there's some other things. Greg has some recommendations. To me, it's a whole separate action. And again, I'm trying to stay focused on what we should be doing immediately and the Measure Q. And this may be something, okay, we've had some discussion. Let's put that on the table for now, and maybe a couple of us others would, wordsmith this as well as make some recommendations. But I don't know. I think for now, I would just table it with a discussion.
Yeah, I don't think
until
we're
we have
ready
time.
to make a recommendation to council. I have not looked at it in enough detail to.
No, and I wasn't proposing that we have to make a recommendation here, only that we discuss it and decide whether to look at it.
I'm curious to know, do we get financial investment advice from somebody besides Rabobank?
I have a securities broker that I deal with. He's an economist, and so I usually talk to him. Right now, one of the reasons why we've got so much money in liquid cash is that we're getting ready to build $1 million or $100 million waste.
Not billion.
Would be nice if it was.
It would be lovely.
$100,000, wouldn't it? Or $1 million. Yeah, the $100 million wastewater treatment plant. And one of the problems that we have is we've got a very small amount of money that we can invest. So I don't want to tie it up in anything that's going to be longer than a year, maybe 2 years. I try to pick up those CDs, but one of the problems with CDs is the new Know Your Customer rules. And they want my driver's license, my social security number, everything about me. And that makes me a little uncomfortable. I do it only because I know that's how I'm going to be able to get a CD and it's going to be a good thing. If I go through the broker, I don't have to do that because it's through the securities broker, and that's where I have my BMW Bank and Ally, and I don't even remember the other ones. I have several banks that I've got CDs with. Where those are a couple $1 million. I've got $1 million in securities, and the rest of it's pretty darn liquid. And one of the things that I'm very afraid of is that we're going to get into the design phase. We're going to have bills that are rolling in, and we don't have that money. And rather than get the bridge financing and have to pay financing charges, I'm planning on drawing down on our liquid cash, backfilling with the money that we get. And so I'm just trying to be I'm ultra conservative, and probably any other financial investor would be, not keeping the amount of money that I am. But I'm just very, very afraid that's going to come up. We're going to have big checks, and I'm going to get nervous because we're not going to have enough, liquid cash to do it.
Makes sense to me.
So if we're not going to rock the CD boat right now, I think this has been a great discussion on the investment policy. We will not make a recommendation. We will come back to this after all of us have had an opportunity to review this. We may want to review the wording. We may say, take it to the broker and have them say what is a good policy strategy for a document, number one, and then secondarily, we may have some recommendations. So thank you. So I guess back to the first quarter budget review, we haven't finished that. Several of us had questions. Let me start on the left and see if we have any further questions and discussions before we decide.
No.
Okay, thank you, Betty.
No, I don't either.
Okay. And I had sent you a couple questions, Susan. Some of the people were at, but they weren't significant. It was some labor accounting issue, so no new news on any of that, correct?
No, I
Thank
don't
you.
have anything new on that.
Well, I did have the question on the sheriff dispatch item, which is quite large, and it looks like none of the money had been spent up to date. Do they bill us just once a year on that?
It's every 6 months.
Okay.
We were a little surprised by that. We thought the sheriff would be wanting their money a lot more frequently,
Well, yeah.
they want their animal control money, which is at least every quarter. But they're billing every 6 months. So we won't get an invoice from them until December 31st, and then the next invoice will be June 30.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
But isn't it a recent outsourced contract?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
remember reading about that.
So how does that compare to previous year's expenditures?
Well, October 2014 was when we went into the sheriff's department and we engaged them to do our dispatch services. Right now, the dispatch services that the sheriff is charging us for, those plus the rest of the items that are now in our support services budget, that was pretty close to the communications budget. Unfortunately, what we also have added is the dispatch services and fire. So we're actually spending probably $80,000 more than we had been when we had it in-house. But it's more efficient in that we've got fire dispatching fire, police, sheriff's dispatching police, and then there's the ambulance component as well, because the fire can now, instead of always sending the 2 fire trucks up to respond on something that is, now they can send the ambulance and a fire truck. So there's been some economies that there's been some gains, and it costs as well. But the overall cost is about $80,000 more than what we had initially thought we were going to be spending, but we've had savings on the side of not sending the trucks out so much.
So let me make sure I understand that. It's $80,000 more than what we thought we would be spending, but what is it compared to what we actually were spending the previous year? Or is that still $80,000 more? Or you can't compare apples to apples?
It doesn't really compare the same way, only because we've split the 2 things. So we've got sheriffs, and the sheriffs are costing us $228,000. We thought we were going to be paying for 1.5 dispatchers. We're actually paying for 2. So that was increased after the fact. And then we've got fire that's running us about $80,000-$90,000 a year. If we had not had that extra half a dispatcher, the costs would have been comparable. It would have been exactly what the dispatch costs were plucked out of the communications budget. But the extra component of the other half of the dispatcher kind of...
But if that's warranted, that's something you probably would have had. That's a cost avoidance versus a cost savings.
Yes.
I would say.
One of the benefits that we have of doing this, obviously, is we're not retaining the employees anymore. We've got the people with the sheriff, the dispatcher, they're hiring the people, they're backfilling when somebody's out, and we really had a terrible time with that. It was quite a struggle for the city to maintain our dispatch and keep it where we needed.
So it hasn't theoretically been a cost increase, it's probably been a cost avoidance coupled with efficiencies gained in the process.
Yes.
Thanks. I think that's
Okay,
important.
and so when the bill comes in December, then that money, it looked like none of it had been spent, and that was why I questioned it. So that money then will be sort of an outflow in the next quarter.
Yes.
For that. Okay, all right. Thanks for that clarification.
Greg, do you have any comments? So if we don't have any further comments or discussion, then I think we would entertain a motion to indicate that we have reviewed the first quarter budget versus actuals, and we don't see any significant areas of concern.
I'll move that.
I'll second.
Thank you, Betty. And just let the minutes reflect that we've had a discussion and an extensive review. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Opposed? None. So carried. Let the minutes reflect that we've had an extensive discussion, and for the first quarter, we agree the reporting is accurate. Or we agree with the reporting to the extent it has been reported to us.
And
Yeah.
And for this committee, as well as when you get into the Measure Q side of it, I'll try to give you a little more dialogue in your minutes as opposed to just doing action minutes, only because it helps on the committee level a little bit more than it does on the council level. And so I'll try to do that as much as I can. And if there's ever anything that I do miss that you do want included in the minutes, please just let me know.
I'll be happy to, or any of us, to review it. Yeah, I think that's a little more helpful. I know the City Council has a lot of the references to the YouTube, but when we're discussing, at least if you can summarize some of these motions, that's much more helpful.
I want to second that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on then to item B2, which is the discussion of the streets financing initiative. First of all, I'd open it up to public comment. If there's anyone from the public that would like to address our committee related to this agenda item, thank you. Please identify and speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Homer Alexander. According to the staff report, the iBank loan would be a loan to the general fund. Since the city manager has stated in writing and numerous public comments that the general fund is structurally out of balance by $3 million, I'm pretty confident that Measure Q is going to end up servicing the debt if this loan is approved. As you are aware, 37% of this year's Measure Q revenue has been allocated to pay for servicing the debt on the new firehouse, the cost associated with maintaining a fourth firefighter on each shift, a portion of the school resource officer. Other than the debt service on the firehouse, the other two expenses potentially could be reversed, but I doubt that would be politically feasible. Adding $420,000 to these expenses would mean that 82% of the Measure Q revenue would no longer be available to be spent. Taking such a large percentage of Measure Q funds off the table would really limit the flexibility of future city councils to fund special projects like the bridge over Morrill Creek. According to management partners, the unmet needs for streets is $22 million. Therefore, if the city borrows $6 million, 27% of the streets will be improved. The reverse of that is, of course, that 73% of the streets will not be improved. Since large portions of the Measure Q funds will have been committed, where is the money going to come from to fix the 73%? Instead of borrowing $6 million, I have an alternative for your consideration. You might want to explore the possibility of a parcel tax or a 218 election weighted by the value of assessment. Both of these suggestions are in the current Management Partners report on page 90. According to the county's assessor's office, the property in Morro Bay is assessed at $2,082 million. There are 5,850 taxable parcels with an average value of $356,000 each. A parcel tax of $48 per 100,000 of assessed value would generate $1 million a year. Over the last 3 years, the assessed value has increased on an annualized basis by 4.1%. This increase more than compensates for the increased construction costs that are outlined in your staff report. The annual revenue from a tax, when periodically mixed with Measure Q funds, would provide the revenue necessary to rehabilitate the streets pretty quickly. Future city councils would still retain the flexibility to use Measure Q funds as they choose within the basic Measure Q guidelines. Also, since the streets seem to be the #1 concerns of the citizens, asking them to pay a little extra to fix them doesn't seem to be unreasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Homer. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and open it up for discussion. Go ahead, Susan.
I have a question. I know, looking at what Grover Beach has done in the last year or two ago, they did pass a bond measure, I think it was, and they are proceeding to fix their streets, and their streets are in worse shape, I think, than ours overall. And their objective is actually to address the whole problem instead of part of the problem. And so I'm wondering, does anyone know, for this kind of a thing, say a $48 parcel tax, how that compares with what Grover Beach has done or what was assessing for their costs?
Grover Beach did a general obligation bond, and it barely passed. Mm-hmm. They I mean, they really barely passed. It was maybe 51, 52%. A parcel tax would actually be something that we had talked about at one point to help with several different ideas that we had. And a parcel tax is very fixed. It gives you an amount of money that you're going to get. You know you're going to get it every year. It's not a bad way to go, because you're really, each person who is living in Morro Bay is paying for living in Morro Bay for their streets. The sales tax measures, and there was discussion about us going out for another sales tax measure, another district transaction tax. That then places it on everyone who comes into the city. So your tourists are paying as well through sales tax. So it can go either way. It's nice to be able to try the sales tax because you're getting approximately $1 million, but you don't know. That can flex. The property tax, you know you're going to get this, and it's going to go up unless we have another serious recession like we did. And I can tell you from having gone to the tax assessor's office during the recession, and every representative from the city was there, and the tax assessor was telling us, well, the red dots are the properties we wrote down. And I'm looking at Morro Bay, and I'm thinking, oh, well, there's a few red dots on there. And I volunteered to take Grover's back to Grover Beach. I live in Arroyo Grande, and she's my cousin that works there, so I said I would take it to her. It was red. It was mostly red, and I thought, good grief, how are they going to make it? And I looked at the other cities, and their maps were much redder than ours were. We went very well through that recession, in particular with our properties. So there is such a great value in living here property-wise. If you tied it to properties, you'd get your $1 million, and it would continue to grow.
I guess my question was theirs along the lines of about $48 or some other number? Do you have any idea what that number was?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay.
I just know it was a general obligation. They got a very large chunk of money, and I don't even remember what the ultimate amount of the bond was.
Okay.
Is the percentage the same to pass a general obligation bond versus a parcel? Or does it relate back to what the specific purpose of the tax is? You know, the Prop 13 kicks in at 2/3% when you want to identify something for very specific. Otherwise, that's why a lot of cities go to the 55% threshold.
Yeah.
Which technically means you can tell the voters it's going to be for streets as long as your leadership employs that strategy and doesn't change it 10 years down the road.
And that's what we did with Measure Q, and we actually memorialized it in a resolution that says, this is what we told the voters and this is what we're going to do. And the Measure Q committee was always there to make sure that's what they do. This has been very ingrained in staff, and so when we see things that are not appropriate, we try to take action before it comes to the Measure Q committee, so that we're not getting beaten up in public for having detailed a car for, with
But the
Measure
point
Q
being,
money.
any future leadership could change that expenditure, but the percents
Absolutely.
required for the voters, whether it's a parcel tax or sales tax, are the same, general versus specific, we believe.
I believe so. I know if you specifically say that you want to pass a sales tax measure for streets, that requires 2/3. If you say that you want to pass a sales tax measure for general use in the city and this, and this, but you sell it to the public that this is what you're going to do, then you're looking at the 50+1 or, yeah.
Okay.
Susan, real quickly, my notes from our previous discussions indicate that you guys basically have been considering a sales tax, but you were holding off on that because there were other potential sources of revenue. Senate Bill, or is it State Bill 16, and then we had a potential ballot measure from the state, and then a potential ballot measure from the county, which could all provide funding for this. And I think you were kind of waiting for that to kind of play out, because then you would really understand the number that you needed once you had that other information.
That's a true statement.
So then I think the other part of it was you felt a certain sense of urgency to get moving, and that's what generated the Measure Q idea, so that you could get moving on this, reduce your long-term expenditures, look at these other sources of revenue. Once those were understood, then you can make the final decision on whether it would be a parcel assessment or a sales tax or whatever. Is that an accurate description of the process?
That's pretty accurate, a description of what we were going to do. We had talked about many different, financing models and what we could try to do. We were concerned because the county had talked about a 1/4-cent sales tax, that we would be able to get a little bit of that. And there are other measures out there that we would be given, certain amounts of money. But they're fairly small. They're not large pots of money. They're smaller pots of money. And the thought from the city manager was, if we go out and we do this now, we'll put a lot of pavement down. People will look at this. This will be a good thing. And then we can start thinking of other ways to continue with the rest of the city in future years.
So I think that's kind of a great idea, because then people will see the results, and they're going to be more interested in buying into a parcel, any other source of revenue, whether it's a tax or an assessment of some kind. Okay.
Well, I wonder, one of the things that we talked about via email was the idea that at least the bank loan that we were looking at, they were going to be requiring security security based on the city's assets, which would have to be improved property, and I think it would be about $7 million in total. What's the asset base for the city? How much property of that kind does the city have that's improved?
Improved property?
Well, that's what they were limiting it to, improved property.
Right.
We have, I'm sorry I didn't bring that with me. I don't like to quote everything right off the top of my head, because we've got buildings in the, millions of dollars range, and we do have lots of property that we can put something together to do that. That's not uncommon for them to ask. iBank generally asks for some type of a security. And we initially, when we built the community center was what was put up as collateral for that loan. So we would be looking at things like that we would put up.
Well, that would be, of course, the property that was to be constructed. I guess my question was, if you're looking at, say, encumbering, I think there was, at least my understanding from the initial discussion, and I may have been misinterpreting the discussion, was that the bank might accept the revenue stream that was expected to come in as securing the loan, and therefore we would not have to do what they're talking about. If the $7 million is not a significant portion of the city's assets, well, that's a different kind of a construct than if it is. And it's just, I'm thinking, well, how much is this building worth? How much, the big chunks,
Well,
but I don't really have a good
I think
feel for
that question came up at our last meeting, and a figure that was thrown out was in the, 155, 160 million, just run numbers. Roughly.
Yeah, but the real issue is that if we take out a loan like this, we have to pay it back, and every year we're going to be paying $400,000 to repay the loan. And the question that Mr. Alexander is raising is, where is that going to come from? And obviously, we were talking about it coming from Measure Q funds, not the general fund. My concern about all of this is that ultimately, it seems to me, we need to be incorporating streets and certainly maintenance and repair into the general fund. It's kind of disturbing that we have to keep looking for these little pots. It's almost like trying to put a Band-Aid on it instead of actually addressing the problem and trying to solve that problem of how do we incorporate it as a regular budgetary element in our budget. And I'd like to see us move toward that if there was a recommendation to make. My other concern about this particular proposal is that we don't have a pavement management plan yet, that Public Works is still working on that. And before I would want to approve any kind of a loan, I would want to know how it was going to be spent. And I know there are disagreements about the best way to use money for street repair and reconstruction. And I know when I applied for the Public Works Advisory Board, I was asked the question, because I just had the street summit, and how would you decide what streets should get paved? And I said, well, it seems to me logical that you'd pave the ones or deal with the ones that are in the worst condition first. And it turns out that's exactly the wrong answer. But still, somehow, eventually, you've got to get to those streets. You can't just leave them forever. And so I would want to see a plan for how we were going to spend, if we were going to borrow $6 million, how are we going to spend it? So I'd like to see a pavement management plan before approving a loan.
Betty?
I think you're right, and I do agree that when you borrow money, you have to pay it back. There's just no getting around that, and you have an extra interest. I do like the idea that eventually we should work towards having something already incorporated in the city budget, because if we can get not everything, but most of it done now, then we can keep doing that onward and not have this, because it's been terrible the way it has deteriorated, whether it was the weather or the trucks or whatever. But I do feel that we have to do more exploring about our parcel tax, because there is this commitment that we have in the community to maintain it, and it is for our benefit as well. It improves the city and improves our property, so we do get a benefit from it. And I think that once people realize that they do love Morro Bay and they want to maintain the things the way it is, and this way we can just maybe use a loan for something that is much more serious. And we know there's a lot of things coming up that are going to be quite heavily, paid for. So I think that at this time, we should look at this other option and see what it is going to be in terms of the publicity and the plan for that.
I would agree with that if you could actually deal with most of the problem with this, but it seems like this approach is not going to deal with most of the problem, even optimistically. It's going to deal with some small piece of the problem and hope that we can talk people into doing something else later. And I'm just a little uncomfortable with that kind of a strategy at this point. Maybe looking at a pavement management plan would help, but if you're going to have it basically tell people, unless something else is done, we're not going to get to you for at least 20 years. That will be not a pleasant discussion, but one we would have to have, I think, if we were going to go this way.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Actually, this is from Greg. I think buried in his comments was a very important point. I know it's very tempting to actually look at if we could borrow a large sum of money, get it all done, lesser cost increases because of construction. But the basic question is the cost of borrowing the money is 3.5, 3.7%. The cost, your inflation factor in the analysis was about 3.5%. So to me, that's a wash, other than maybe getting a little more work done up front. To Susan's point, if you could borrow enough and pay it back where you would do not only all of the streets or 90%, but also have a reserve in there so that after the 20 or 30 year useful life, you wouldn't be back to square one, but you would have maintenance, then that might be a little easier sell to monopolize 82% of the Measure Q funds or whatever. But to do 26, and I think the citizen example was 22 million. I think with the contingency in our documentation it was 26 million. It's going to be in that $25 million range. And that's a significant, if your street doesn't get done in the first quarter, how willing, I don't know, I would still vote for it, but some people might say, I'm not voting for a property tax increase. They didn't do my streets and they never will. That type thing. It's going to take them forever. So my opinion would be basically we need to explore this more, but borrowing only $6 million at 3.5%. Considering the city has this wastewater treatment plant, the debt for the fire station, the North T pier debt that doesn't end until 2021, I think that's a risky thing to do for the city. I'm sorry, Greg, if I stole your thunder. Go ahead.
Could you just expand on what you said about what's risky specifically, and then I'll make my comment. I didn't follow that last part.
I think to take on debt when we already know we're going to have a $100 million debt for a new required wastewater treatment plant that has to be relocated over the next 5 years. We also have about maybe 14, 15 years on the COP certificate for the new fire station at $91,000 a year. We also have debt on the North T pier that doesn't terminate until 2021. I think to take on more debt for a city this size is more risk than I would want to assume.
Okay, so I guess basically I agree with everything that's been said here about the debt issues and also just needing that long-term plan. And we're probably not saying anything that anybody in the city hasn't thought of over and over themselves, I'm sure. The only thing I was going to throw out is maybe there's sort of two tracks that need to be looked at here. The longer term, getting a real structurally sound plan in place so that it is in the general fund, et cetera. And then a shorter term track of how we can jumpstart this in a certain way. Maybe it does involve a little debt, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I think that, at least what I'm hearing from Susan, is that there was some thoughts about how do we jumpstart this? How do we show the citizens that we understand this? We want to get some progress going. We want to show them we're serious, and we want to give them benefits. So I think that there's some validity to looking at a shorter term track in parallel to get that jump started. Whether it involves debt or not, I understand all your points. It might be worth it. I don't know, but I think maybe looking at a couple of tracks to get a longer term objective achieved to make it structurally sustainable, and then maybe getting something as jump start could be part of the plan.
And I guess I have a question about this whole jumpstart concept. I know there was a fair amount of work done. I think it was just last year. I was very happy they did my street, but there are a lot of streets that they didn't do. But there was a lot of work done. So my question is, what constitutes a jump start, and is something what is really necessary, or wouldn't people be excited about getting their streets paved if there wasn't such a thing as a jump start? So I don't know. And maybe that's, I'm sure that's already been much discussed as well. But I guess I have that question.
Well, we are using the Measure Q funds, and we have, in past years, decided that the Measure Q funds in some alternate years weren't sufficient to do a lot of work, so we were every other year, and that's why you saw a lot more done, So, and I would agree with Greg, maybe there is a way to add a little bit of Measure Q and jumpstart this, but...
The problem is that every year, nothing is done. The cost is getting greater and greater, and more streets are hitting this 75% of their useful life, which, according to the statistic in the last pavement management plan, once you've exceeded that 75% threshold, you're going to expend $6 to $14 in rehabilitation. So the sooner you can get onto this, there are, significant savings that can be achieved. That may make a lot of sense to do, Well,
that takes me back to having the pavement management plan, because if you're going to have money and you're just going to throw it to places that are downtown and not meeting the whole community, and my street was paved and your street wasn't, and why isn't mine? I'm just as important because I go in and out to work all the time and all this stuff. So I do think that conceptually, we have to have a package. We have to have a pavement management plan before you're going to jumpstart anything, because we've already been doing it with the Measure Q funds. And I think if we don't continue to do these things, we had last year, it showed nothing happened to other places. So we have to have a plan so people know that it's really going to happen,
Yeah, and the problem with that is that you've got to look at the streets that are in the better condition, and you have to keep them there. So if you're looking at North Morro Bay and you're looking at Panorama, not going to happen, because that's one that's in very bad condition. That would be a complete reconstruction, and they're going to try to use, so the $6 million would wind up being used on streets to keep them at the higher level of life. And unfortunately, then you're not going to be going into some of the places that desperately need streets. Not likely. I'm not a pavement management person. Probably Rob Livick is listening to this and he's wanting to run down here and meet me. But I truly believe that's what he said the last time that he was in one of our meetings.
Well, didn't he give us a
that-
plan, with some streets in for the future years?
Yeah, but they're revising it and right now, and it's not finished. And I think it's really important to not just identify streets in a pavement management plan. I want to see the strategy behind that plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm personally still of the opinion that you cannot just leave those streets that need to be reconstructed forever.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to address them and you have to fix them. And I think I'd be almost of the opinion that that's the way we should spend the money if we were to take out a loan, is to let's get everybody on some basic level before we start. I understand the logic, the bigger bang for the buck. I understand that, and I've heard Rob Livick explain it to us on PWAB. But I still think that you need a long-term plan to understand how those other streets are going to be addressed and what the strategy is. And that's what I'd like to see before approving some kind of a loan.
Well, we may not have to wait too long if El Nino comes and that whole street is wiped away.
There you go.
And
There's no demo required.
no demo required, and just build it up, because, we have to be realistic. We are facing problems, possible problems, and nature is not helping us.
What was the timing for the pavement management plan update? Wasn't it it's next year? I know that. It's not right around the corner.
I don't know if I mentioned that or not in my staff
Yeah,
report.
it's in. We got something. I think maybe it was put in one of our emails. It's coming.
It's from Rob,
Yeah,
I thought.
it's
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring that information with me.
Well, okay. So the other thing I wanted to mention there is, it's first, if it is projected out in time quite a bit, that it calls into question how we do any short-term kickoff. Go ahead.
Okay, so I do have it. It looks like Rick Sauerwein commented. And Rick Sauerwein said that pavement management is consistently changing, so it is most efficient to complete the update when we're ready to proceed with design for the 2016-17 pavement rehabilitation project. So that
circular
may
argument.
be when that's all
Also skipping over
going
the year.
on.
Yeah. So they're saying, hey, get our funding, and then we'll move forward with the project. And we're saying, hey, we got to get our
We wanna know what you're
funding
gonna do
in
with
a
it,
row.
yeah.
Get your pavement management plan together, and then we'll go from there. There's probably a little truth in both, but the other big piece to this is that he pointed out is that they're using a new software application they're migrating from one application to another. And, whether that uses the same projection models for costs, and the same modeling algorithms, we could have very different cost output from that. So I think that does really argue very strongly for getting that updated.
The other side of this is that it's not that we're going to run out and get $6 million. It's that we will get to a point where we agree, if the committee agrees to the concept. So the committee feels that it's a good idea to do this jump start, we're going to move forward. I'm going to start filling out the paperwork for iBank. That's going to prompt, and that's going to take a long time, by the way. I've been through them before. Then this will prompt the pavement management, plan or the rehabilitation plan to move forward in conjunction with this. So it will push them to determine what streets are in the, in the condition where they want to keep them upgraded or maybe do a reconstruction. And the financing will come with it. So I guess if the concept is acceptable to do the $6 million jump start, then the rest of it would flow in. If it's not, then we go back to, okay, let's get the pavement management plan together, let's get our ducks in order, and then let's figure out how we want to do it. And do we want to then at that point be in a position to go for a parcel tax or go for a sales tax? That could be where.
I would be more comfortable, and I'm not sure if we're going to come out with a recommendation here today, but I would be more comfortable with a bigger plan that really does address the problem. You cannot let streets crumble into dust, or people have giant potholes and you start getting sued because the wheels are falling off their cars. But at the same time, you don't have unlimited resources. So if people knew that maybe things were going to be taken care of, but it was going to be, it's going to be in year 6, but we're going to get to you. I think that's a different discussion than we're not going to get to you for 20 years unless something else happens. I just think it's I'd rather have that first conversation than the second one.
Or maybe once we see the revised pavement management plan, maybe the question becomes, well, what would $2 million provide as a jump start? And maybe that would be a $150,000 payment versus $420,000 or something, and go from there. Maybe we could find the funding for that.
I honestly don't think that, $6 million would be a lot of streets, especially if you're just basically resurfacing them. And I don't know that you need to show the public, and especially since it's not going to be the worst streets, it's going to be streets that they might not even realize aren't in very good condition. And they're going to be blocked off, and it's going to be traffic jams. And I don't even know if that's such a good idea to try to get that much done all at once. It's set over like a 2 to 3 year period. I'm not sure that makes that much sense to me. That's why I would really like to see a longer-term plan for how we're addressing this problem. And then we can figure out how to pay for it, it seems to me, or the best approach to paying for it. And do we need to jumpstart? And at what level would we jumpstart?
So what I'm hearing from the committee is that you're not comfortable with moving forward and saying, let's go do the jump start unless the pavement management plan is ready. And we're not ready with the pavement management plan. But I'll tell you what the city manager and staff needs tonight is a fairly clear message on the financing concept. So if the true feeling of the committee, which is what I'm getting, is that we want everything together. We want everything melded together. We're willing to do something, but we need to know more, and we've got to get everything together. The pavement management plan has to be ready. The financing can be ready, and it's kind of got to do a little more intersecting. And then instead of saying, "Yeah, let's go get the money," and then we start down the road, and then, "Oh yeah, here comes the pavement management plan." That's kind of where we were thinking we would go, but if that's not the direction the committee wants to go in, then we'll need a, no, we don't want to do this, or we want it to be delayed until something happens.
Well, and I feel, I personally fundamentally question the idea of a jump start or whether you need one more than what was already, say, done last year, where there was a fair number of streets done. Do you need to jumpstart, and should you really go down this path without really having any idea of what you're going to be doing for the rest of the problem? If you're going to deal with a quarter of the problem and 75% or 70% of the problem is still out there, what are you going to do with that? And I think that should be part of the discussion before you go off and borrow $6 million.
Well, and I think also we could certainly explore these other alternatives. I think the City Council basically said they wanted to take the sales tax off the agenda, but this parcel tax was not discussed, and perhaps that alternative could be fleshed out better to see how much money could be raised, what it would look like, what's the process involved, so that we would have an alternative. One would be to borrow money, the other one would be the parcel tax. And that would at least give us options instead of just reacting to this one proposal.
And I think it should also cover all of the problem and not some of the problem.
Right, and that's why I really want to see the pavement management plan, because I think that's crucial to whatever we're going to do. Because if we're looking at all of the city of Morro Bay, we have to have some structured streets, some structured streets. So anyway, that's why I would recommend that we do not go with this financing until we know a little bit more about the pavement management and how we want to conduct the whole plan, because I'm like you, I don't want to spend my money until I know what I'm getting.
Was that a motion?
That's a motion.
I'll second that one.
All right, thank you. Motion to not proceed with a $6 million loan and processing documentation until we have a better idea of the pavement management plan, some other alternatives, vet out this parcel tax initiative, and see what we have in terms of, I think that goes
And the
with
bigger
our
picture.
The bigger picture, the long-term strategy. Yes.
Strategy for the streets.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Vote? Aye. All in
Aye.
favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carried with 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, any other business to discuss?
I was just going to make one final comment on.
Thank you.
I can't remember the number, but I think it was like $1.5 million per year that the Public Works folks had indicated you need to at least budget that level.
For the PCI of 70, I think you said. Correct.
to exceed the degradation process. So, that will, again, it does beg the creation of the pavement management plan, so that if you don't borrow, you need to get a good feel for the kind of money you want to spend each year and how that would translate into any kind of tax or assessment.
That's a good point, and also a reserve. And, I just received in the mail from our state assemblyman, Kochko, Acadian, a plan to fix California's roads. Apparently, this isn't unique to Morro Bay, but, he's looking at a plan for $5.5 billion. Now, again, that's probably a stretch, and that's going to go everywhere else. But I think there's, with that and the Senate Bill 16, some other things going on that maybe we can capitalize on that before we, run off and borrow the money when we don't have the plan in place as to how we're going to spend it. So it's just an FYI, but I think those are good comments from everybody. Okay, any final closing comments? I'll start with Greg before we adjourn. Okay, Susan?
No, thank you.
Marlis?
No, I thought it was a good meeting.
Thank you. Betty?
I agree. It was a very good meeting and a very nice open discussion that we were all focusing on the improving of Morro Bay.
Thank you all. I think appreciate everybody's support and everything. And we'll, I guess the next meeting, Susan, we are scheduled for the third Tuesday of December.
We know what day that is.
Please let it be the
Yes,
third
we
Tuesday.
probably do, and I mailed it out to everyone, and I, again, didn't bring that.
Oh,
with
that's
me
okay.
to
I
tell
think
you
it's
it is in
15th.
December.
Looks like the third
15th.
Tuesday is the 15th, yeah.
15th.
Okay, good. That sounds right, and that'll
Okay.
be the Measure Q committee.
Right.
And I'll be giving you the normal reports for Measure Q. You know pretty much what those are. That's the budget performance report, the expenditure transactions, and then those, it'll be the same report, but it'll be a whole lot shorter. So that'll
Okay.
make everyone feel better.
Okay.
And if I can do a high-level summary on those, I will.
Okay, perfect. And, that may dovetail right into the streets, because maybe we'll look at the streets expenditures, maybe we'll make some recommendations of that Measure Q money, for the immediate street repair. So if you hear anything on the pavement management plan in advance, let us know, okay? But I have that as Tuesday, December 15th, okay? All right, thank you.
And meeting is adjourned?
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you to the public for participation.